Do you remember a time when happiness didn't live inside a screen, when childhood meant scraped knees, dusty shoes, and a simple promise to be home only when the streetlights turned on? Imagine being 8 years old, wearing a house key on a shoelace around your neck, letting yourself into an empty home with no parents, no babysitter, and no way for anyone to check if you were okay. You made yourself a snack, did your homework in the silence, and learned very early on that if something went wrong, the only person coming to save you was you. This is the world of Generation X, the forgotten generation, born between 1965 and 1980. While the world is obsessed with boomers and millennials, there is a whole group of people sitting quietly in the middle who carry a psychology that is probably the most misunderstood of any living generation. Today, we're digging into the mind root of Gen X to understand why they are so fiercely independent, why they treat privacy like a superpower, and how growing up without applause turned them into the toughest survivors on the planet. The first thing you have to understand about the Gen X mind is what researchers call a high-contingency environment. Because they were the first generation of latchkey kids on a massive scale, they learned that actions have immediate, tangible consequences. If you forgot your key, you sat on the porch. If you mouthed off at the dinner table, the consequences were swift and usually involved a wooden spoon. There was no buffer time or long discussion about feelings. Your brain learned to predict outcomes in real time, which is why Gen Zers today are the ones who see problems coming 3 steps before anyone else. They aren't being pessimistic. They're running mental simulations based on a childhood where they had to be their own mechanics, their own doctors, and their own navigators. This leads directly into their second core trait, a deeply rooted defensive pessimism. Gen X grew up watching the institutions their parents trusted fall apart. They saw divorce rates explode and watched their parents give decades to companies only to be handed a pink slip during a random Tuesday layoff. They learned that the system doesn't care about you, so they built an emotional armor of irony and cynicism to protect themselves. To Gen X, company loyalty is a myth, but competence is a religion. They make themselves indispensable not because they love the brand, but because they know that being the most valuable person in the room is the only real job security they have. But perhaps the most fascinating part of their psychology is how they process information. Before the internet, knowledge had a physical cost. If you wanted to know something, you didn't Google it. You spent hours in a library hunting through card catalogs or flipped your bike upside down and got grease on your hands until you figured out how to fix the chain yourself. Cognitive psychologists call this deeper encoding. When you have to work for information, your brain holds onto it more permanently. This created a can-do mindset where Gen Zers believe that with enough patience and a screwdriver, they can master the physical world. They are the last generation that truly knows how to be alone with their thoughts and solve a problem without an algorithm telling them the answer. And finally, we have to talk about why they are so quiet on social media. To Gen X, being visible means being vulnerable. They grew up in a time when privacy was the default, and if you did something embarrassing as a teenager, only 10 people knew about it rather than the entire internet forever. They view broadcasting their lives for strangers as a risky move that gives away their power. They've spent their lives figuring out who they were without constant digital input, and that has given them a calm, quiet confidence that doesn't need likes to prove its worth. So, if you're Gen X, I want to know, what's the one thing from your unsupervised childhood that you think made you the strongest today? Was it the paper route, the empty house, or just the freedom to disappear until the streetlights came on? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear from the generation that usually stays silent.